Tonight, millions of people will fall asleep listening to the story of a real murder. They'll be lying in bed, or driving home, or making dinner, and in the background will be the story of a woman who was stalked, a child who disappeared, or a family whose last hours are now part of somebody's podcast queue. And I think that is something deeply wrong on how normal that has become. Now, I'm not saying that true crime should never be talked about. Some cases do get attention, and some families have gotten answers only because the public kept watching. And some failures in the justice system have only been addressed because people refuse to look away. But I think that is not the whole story anymore. Because true crime is no longer just about awareness, it is no longer just about justice. And in way too many cases, it has become a business built on turning real suffering into something that people can binge, rank, recommend, and profit from. And so my argument today is this, that the commercialization of true crime has created a predatory industry that glamorizes violence, exploits victims and their families, and slowly chips away at our ability to respond to real suffering with real humanity. This exploitation starts with scale. True crime is everywhere now. It is on Netflix, on YouTube, on Spotify, on TikTok, on every platform that has figured out that tragedy keeps people watching. And so creators keep on producing more of it, faster and louder, and the stories are edited to be gripping, the titles are made clickable, and the episodes are paced like thrillers. And somewhere in that process, a real person's life gets squeezed into a story arc. And that matters because when a tragedy becomes content, the initial empathy from the audience is now diminished. The violence becomes the hook, and the killer automatically becomes the most interesting person in the room. We learn about the murderer's habits, motifs, childhood, psychology. We hear their name over and over, and we are invited to study them, decode them, and even be fascinated by them. Meanwhile, the victim is often reduced to a few smiling photos and a short description of who they were before the story rushes back to the crime itself. This acts as a huge distortion towards our morals. And because a person who should be remembered for the life that they lived ends up remembered mainly for the way they died. And for the families left behind, that damage is not theoretical, because for us, it might just be an episode, but for them, it is probably the worst thing that has ever happened to them, replayed for strangers. Imagine losing your sister or your son or your mother in the most brutal way possible, and then seeing their final days repackaged with dramatic music and cliffhangers. Imagine opening social media and finding people debating the details of their death, like they're discussing a TV plot twist. Imagine hearing someone you call the murder of the love of your life fascinating. And very often, families almost have no real control over it. They may be contacted late, ignored entirely, or treated as an obstacle to production. The message, whether anyone says it or not, is very clear, that a family's grief matters less than the profit obtained by these media companies. But the harm doesn't stand with those families, it spreads outwards. It gets into the way the rest of us think, speak, and consume. Because when violence is constantly packaged as entertainment, we do not stay unchanged by it. We get used to hearing things that should horrify us. We start mistaking repeated exposure for understanding. We tell ourselves that because we are watching something serious, we must be engaging with it seriously. But oftentimes we aren't. We're just consuming it. You can hear it in the language that people use. Oh, you have to watch this case. This one's insane. It's so good. That's a language of entertainment and not empathy. And once the destruction of a human life can be casually recommended like a new series, something has already gone numb within us. If that is what this industry has done to our empathy, then fixing it takes more than just changing a channel. I think the first place of reform has to happen is at the level of distribution. Platforms like Netflix, Spotify, Apple Podcasts should adopt a more ethical code in their distribution of policies. And if a production wants to access to millions of viewers, it should have to meet the basic standard first. The documented attempts to consult the victims' families, limits on graphic sensationalism, and refusal to glamorize perpetrators, and clear disclosure of whether any money is going back to victim support. If a project refuses those standards, the platform should refuse to carry it. I don't think that is essentially censorship, but rather responsibility, that these companies already decide what gets amplified every single day. They can decide what's profiting from real trauma that comes with these conditions. The second part is industry pressure. Production guilds and documentary organizations should create an ethical certification for true crime so audiences can actually tell the difference between work that informs and work that exploits. Right now, the most successful project is often just the most addictive one, and that should not be the industry standard. And then there has to be restitution with actual structure behind it. Because if a company profits from a real crime story, part of that money should go into a fund that supports trauma counseling, victim advocacy, shelters, and restorative justice. It shouldn't look like a vague donation when convenient, and rather it should be a more standard fee tied to distribution and profit. And finally, the audience has to stop pretending that we're passive in all of this. We decide what gets spread, and we should decide what gets rewarded. So we can stop feeding the worst parts of this industry, we can stop hyping up the most exploitative shows just because they are well made, and we can choose victim-centered reporting over immoral glorifications of killers. We can be more suspicious of media that asks us to be entertained by someone else's pain. Because behind every case is a person who never got to finish their life. And behind every polished episode may be a family still trying to survive what happened. And if our entertainment depends on reopening those wounds for profit, then the issue is not just that what the industry is producing. It is what we have learned to tolerate. So the next time true crime is offered to you, do not only ask whether it is compelling. Ask whether it is decent. Ask whether it is ethical. Because entertainment should never be at the cost of someone's dignity, privacy, or peace. Thank you.